Somewhere in occupied Haarlem, 1943, a girl cycles through the afternoon streets. She has braided hair, a second-hand coat, and a bicycle that squeaks when she turns. She looks like any other teenager running errands in a city under Nazi occupation. She is not running errands. Hidden beneath her coat is a pistol, and the man walking 30 meters ahead of her, a Dutch civilian who has been selling the names and addresses of Jewish families to the Gestapo, has less than a minute to live. She will never tell anyone exactly how many times she did this. When journalists asked decades later, her answer was always the same. One should never ask a soldier how many people they have killed. Her name was Freddie Oversteegen. She entered the Dutch resistance at 14. She carried out her first armed operation at 16, and by the time the war ended, she and her older sister Truus had assassinated Nazi officers, executed Dutch collaborators, sabotaged military infrastructure, and smuggled Jewish children out of the country, all before either of them turned 21. This is their story. Freddie Oversteegen was born on September 6, 1925, in Schoten, just outside Haarlem. Her older sister, Truus, was born 2 years earlier, in 1923. Their childhood was shaped far more by poverty than by politics. For a time, the family lived on a houseboat. Money was always short. Their father struggled to provide, and when Freddie was still young, her parents separated. She would later recall the last time she saw him, standing at the bow of the boat, singing a farewell song in French. It was the final clear memory she had of the man. After that, he drifted out of their lives entirely. Their mother, Trinsha, known as Trin, moved the girls into a small apartment in Haarlem. The sisters slept on straw-filled mattresses. They had very little. But Trin Oversteegen was not a woman who measured wealth in furniture. She was fiercely political, openly communist, and possessed of a simple, unshakable moral conviction. If someone is in danger and you can help, you help, regardless of the cost. Their front door was rarely closed. Jewish refugees fleeing the rising tide of fascism in Germany passed through their apartment. Political dissidents in hiding slept in their beds. Strangers shared whatever food the family had. Freddie and Truus grew up watching their mother feed people she had never met, shelter people whose names she didn't know, and refuse every single time to look away from suffering. One lesson, repeated more than any other, stayed with the girls for the rest of their lives. If you want to help someone, you must be prepared to sacrifice something of your own. It was not dramatic, it was practical, and it would define everything that followed. Part 2. Occupation. On May 10, 1940, Nazi Germany invaded the Netherlands. The Dutch military resisted for 5 days before surrendering. Rotterdam was devastated by aerial bombardment. Queen Wilhelmina fled to London. Freddie was 14. Truus was 16. The transformation was immediate. German uniforms appeared on every corner. Swastika flags hung from public buildings. Weekly regulations restricted where Dutch citizens could go, what they could own, who they could speak to. Jewish residents were registered, then restricted, then isolated, then, one by one, taken. Freddie would later describe the sound that haunted her most from those years. Not gunfire, not sirens, rifle butts pounding against wooden doors at 2 in the morning, the shouting, the boots on staircases, entire families dragged from their homes while neighbors pressed their faces into pillows and pretended to sleep. The vast majority of Dutch citizens chose to endure, keep their heads down, survive. The Oversteegen family did not. Part 3. The Test. It started small. Freddie and Truus began distributing illegal resistance newspapers, underground publications that countered Nazi propaganda and reported the truth about deportations, executions, and the progress of the war. They delivered anti-Nazi pamphlets door to door. At night, they cycled through blacked-out streets with buckets of paste and rolls of paper, plastering resistance posters over German propaganda. Do not work in Germany. The Netherlands must be free. They were young. 2 teenage girls on bicycles attracted virtually no suspicion. If stopped at a checkpoint, they could feign innocence. If searched, they could play dumb. It worked. In 1941, a local resistance commander named Frans van der Wiel, who led the Haarlem branch of the Raad van Verzet, the Council of Resistance, took notice of the family. He had heard about the mother who hid refugees, the daughters who moved freely through the city. He came to the apartment and asked Trine a direct question. Could the girls do more? Trine didn't hesitate. Neither did Freddie or Truus. But van der Wiel needed proof. He needed to know they wouldn't break. A few days later, he returned, this time posing as a Gestapo officer. He forced his way through the door, shouting in German, demanding to know the location of a Jewish man supposedly hiding inside. The girls did not panic. They did not stammer. They did not give up a single name. Instead, believing they were facing a real Nazi officer, they fought back, physically. Van der Wiel dropped the act. It had been a test. They had passed. He told them what would come next. They would learn sabotage techniques. They would learn to handle explosives. And they would learn to shoot. Before they left, their mother gave them a single instruction. Not tactical, not strategic, moral. Whatever happens, always remain human. Part 4. The Potato Cellar. The training took place underground, literally, in a damp, dimly lit potato storage cellar beneath a farmhouse outside Haarlem. The sisters were taught to hold a pistol steady, to control their breathing, to aim, and to fire without hesitation. They were teenagers, learning skills designed for soldiers. Their first operational assignments were not assassinations. They were distractions. The resistance needed to burn Nazi supply depots, but SS guards stood watch. The plan was disarmingly simple. Freddie and Truus would approach the soldiers, start a conversation, smile, flirt if necessary, keep them occupied and facing the wrong direction. While the guards were distracted, resistance fighters would slip behind the warehouses and set them ablaze. It worked, again and again. The guards saw 2 harmless, smiling girls. They did not see the flames until it was too late. Gradually, the assignments escalated. The sisters could go places adult men couldn't. They could approach targets without triggering alarm. They could ride bicycles through checkpoints without being searched. Their youth was not a weakness. It was the most effective camouflage the resistance had. Part 5. The Forests. The transition from sabotage to assassination did not arrive as a single dramatic moment. It came gradually, almost bureaucratically. A name would arrive through the network, a routine, an address. The target might be a German officer known to coordinate deportation transports, or a Dutch collaborator, a civilian who had been selling the identities of Jewish families to the occupation authorities for money or personal advantage. Under occupation, there were no courts to appeal to, no legal system to invoke. The resistance made its own judgments. Each name represented a threat that could not be neutralized any other way. The sisters developed methods that relied on invisibility rather than force. The forests outside Haarlem became one of their primary killing grounds. German officers, off-duty and relaxed, would frequent bars and cafes in the city. One of the sisters would enter alone, strike up a conversation, laugh, create the impression of harmless, youthful curiosity. An invitation would follow, sometimes from him, sometimes from her. A walk, fresh air, somewhere quiet away from the noise. They would stroll or cycle toward the wooded areas on the edge of town. There, hidden among the trees, the other sister would already be waiting. What happened next was fast and final. The body was left behind. The bicycles carried them back into the city before anyone realized the officer was missing. At other times, speed replaced subtlety. One sister would pedal, the other would sit side-saddle on the back, a pistol concealed inside her coat. They would pass a known collaborator on the street, slow just enough, and fire at close range before continuing forward without stopping. 2 girls on a bicycle. No one looked twice. There were doorstep operations as well. Follow the target home, confirm the address, knock. When the door opened, the illusion of innocence lasted just long enough. Part 6. The Girl with the Red Hair. In 1943, a new member joined their resistance cell. Her name was Hannie Schaft. She was different from the Oversteegen sisters. She came from a middle-class family. Her father was a school teacher. She had been studying law at the University of Amsterdam with the intention of becoming a human rights lawyer. When the occupation authorities required all university students to sign a declaration of loyalty to Germany, Schaft refused. She was expelled. Rather than retreat into quiet survival, she walked directly into the resistance. She was striking. Bright red hair, pale complexion, sharp features. She was not a woman easily forgotten. But she was disciplined, methodical, and driven by an unwavering moral clarity. Like the Oversteegen sisters, she was tested before being fully admitted. Given a weapon and confronted by a man posing as a Nazi officer, she raised the pistol and pulled the trigger without a flicker of hesitation. The gun was empty. It had been another test. She passed. Together, the 3 young women, Freddie, Truus, and Hannie, formed a remarkably effective unit. Truus often served as the most decisive voice. Freddie scouted escape routes with meticulous care. Hannie planned operations methodically, thinking several steps ahead. They did far more than kill. They sabotaged railway lines to delay and disrupt deportation transports. They smuggled Jewish children out of occupied territory. They forged identity documents. They transported illegal newspapers and intelligence across the country. But assassination remained part of the work. As the war ground on, Dutch collaborators became increasingly central targets. Many resistance members considered them more dangerous than the German soldiers themselves. Collaborators knew the neighborhoods. They knew the families. They knew exactly who was hiding and where. The sisters accepted these assignments without illusion. They described such individuals as tumors within their own society, something that had to be removed because no other mechanism existed to stop them. Part 7. The Line They Would Not Cross. Yet even in the middle of a shadow war fought without rules, there was a line all 3 women refused to cross. At some point during the occupation, the resistance leadership proposed a plan targeting Arthur Seyss-Inquart, the Rijkskommissar of the Netherlands, the highest-ranking Nazi civilian authority in the country. The idea was to kidnap his children, use them as leverage in a prisoner exchange. If negotiations failed, the implication was unspoken but clear. Freddie, Truus, and Hannie all refused. They had shot men in forests. They had executed collaborators on doorsteps and in broad daylight on city streets, but they would not harm children. Hannie's response was direct. "We are no Hitlerites. Resistance fighters don't murder children." Truus put it just as simply. "We only fight against real fascists, not against children." It was not rhetoric. It was the line between resistance and atrocity, and they would not cross it. In another incident, unplanned, unordered, Truus witnessed a member of the Dutch SS assault a family in public. According to her own later account, the soldier seized an infant and killed it violently in front of its parents. There had been no mission that day, no intelligence briefing, no target list. Truus drew her pistol and shot the man on the spot. She never expressed regret. Part 8. The Capture of Hannie Schaft. By 1944, Hannie Schaft had become one of the most wanted resistance figures in the country. Reports circulated among the German security services describing a young woman with distinctive red hair connected to multiple assassinations. She dyed her hair black and altered her appearance. But suspicion followed her like a scent. In June 1944, an operation went wrong. Her partner on a mission was wounded and captured. Under interrogation in the hospital, weakened, manipulated by officers posing as sympathizers, he gave up information that led the Gestapo to Hannie's family home. Her parents were arrested and deported to a concentration camp. Hannie went deeper underground. For months, she drastically limited her movements to protect the network. Then came March 21st, 1945. The war was nearly over. Allied forces were pushing into the Netherlands from the south. Liberation was weeks, possibly days away. Hannie was cycling through Haarlem, carrying a bundle of illegal newspapers and a concealed firearm, when she was stopped at a German military checkpoint. A routine search uncovered both. She was arrested and transferred to a prison in Amsterdam. Interrogations followed. Isolation, physical abuse. The authorities suspected they had captured someone significant, but needed confirmation. Then they noticed it. Beneath the black dye, her roots had grown in. Red. They matched her to the circulated descriptions. Das Mädchen mit dem roten Haar. The girl with the red hair. Hannie admitted to her role in the resistance. She admitted to participating in assassinations, but she gave up no names. Not Freddie, not Truus, nobody. On April 17, 1945, 18 days before the Netherlands would be liberated, Hannie Schaft was transported to the dunes near Overveen, an execution site where hundreds of resistance fighters had already been killed and buried in shallow graves. 2 Dutch collaborators, Matthias Schmitz and Martin Kuiper, were assigned to carry out the execution. Schmitz fired first. The bullet only grazed her. According to widely repeated, though historically unverified accounts, Hannie looked at her executioner and said, "Ich het beter." Whether she truly spoke those words, or whether they were added later by a novelist seeking poetic justice, the second shot, fired by Kuiper, killed her. She was 24 years old. Her body was buried in a shallow grave in the sand. 18 days later, the occupation ended. Part 9. The Silence After the War. When the mass graves in the Oversteegen dunes were uncovered after liberation, investigators found hundreds of bodies. Among them was one woman. Hannie Schaft was given a state funeral. Queen Wilhelmina referred to her as a symbol of Dutch resistance. Her name entered the national consciousness almost immediately. Streets were named after her. Books were written. A film was made. The Oversteegen sisters received no such recognition. The post-war political landscape had shifted. The Cold War was reshaping alliances. Because their family had communist ties, their mother had been openly leftist, and the resistance cell they served in had communist connections. Their wartime actions were acknowledged quietly, but rarely celebrated publicly. For decades, they lived outside the national spotlight. Truus channeled her experiences into art. She became a sculptor and painter, creating works and memorials connected to the resistance. Public speaking became her way of processing memories that never softened. Freddie chose a different path. She married Jan Dekker, raised children, and tried to construct an ordinary life around experiences that were extraordinary in the worst possible sense. The war did not end for either of them in 1945. It returned every night. Freddie spoke later about chronic insomnia and recurring nightmares. Every year, on May 4th, the Dutch Remembrance Day, the full weight of memory returned. When interviewers asked how many men she had killed, Freddie's answer never changed. One should never ask a soldier that. Silence became part of how they carried what they had done. Nearly 70 years passed before official recognition arrived. On April 15, 2014, Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte personally awarded both sisters the Mobilisation Oorlogskroos, the Mobilisation War Cross, at a ceremony at the Binnenhof in The Hague. Freddie was 89. Truus was 91. For their families, the ceremony was overdue by a lifetime. In the years that followed, streets in Haarlem were named in their honor. Documentaries were filmed. Books were published. The two teenage girls who had once moved unnoticed through occupied streets were finally discussed openly without political qualification. Truus Oversteegen died on June 18, 2016, at the age of 92. Freddie Oversteegen Dekker died on September 5, 2018, one day before her 93rd birthday. Throughout her life, Freddie continued to visit Hannie Schaft's grave, often leaving red roses. During the occupation of the Netherlands, the vast majority of the population tried to survive quietly. A small percentage collaborated. A smaller percentage still resisted. Of those who resisted, only a handful of women took up arms, and fewer still pulled the trigger themselves. Freddie Oversteegen was one of them. A teenager with braided hair, a second-hand bicycle, and a pistol hidden in the basket. There were no dramatic soundtracks to her life, no cinematic slow-motion sequences. There was only occupation, choice, and consequence. She never publicly expressed regret for fighting. She never glorified it either. What remained, through the nightmares, the silence, the 70 years of waiting, was the principle her mother had given her before she ever picked up a weapon. Whatever you are forced to do, remain human. In the end, that may be the only measure she believed mattered.